Hey friends, it's me and I'm back with the next video in the series featuring actually the Sonicaje, but this one entitled Eric Clapton, the man behind the guitar. And the reason for that is that my bass player and I had a little jam in the week, and it was inspired by something that he lent me the week previous. And I read it in almost no time because it was utterly enthralling. This is the autobiography of Eric Clapton, and it was one of the most compelling reads I've had in a long time. So, I've got something coming up in this video for those of you that want to hear a little bit more of this, and for those of you that want to find a little bit more about Mr. Clapton. Coming right up. Yeah, so having read this, my bass player Matt and I got together in the week and we recorded a little bit of a track using the Sonicaje. He played the bass, I played the drums and the guitars and piano, and it kind of turned into a little bit of a Clapton tribute. So it's a demonstration of this being used for rhythm guitar and for lead guitar direct into the R16, the Zoom R16 studio, digital studio workstation. So there's no amp involved here, although by the way, I've brought the Marshall out, so I think you've got a good idea of what content may be coming soon. But this was direct into the board this time. So I'm going to show you the little piece that we wrote that was inspired by Clapton as a result of this, and that I've called Blues for Eric. I hope you enjoy it. Well, I really hope you enjoyed that, and we had a lot of fun recording it, and this little monster direct into the board, all of the compression, the crunch and the reverb that you heard on all of those guitars was just this direct in through the board with the amp sim on. And I'm really, really impressed with this. It's good fun, and I've been pretty hooked on playing since being sent this to review. I do want to remain impartial, so I'm going to leave it utterly up to you to make comments in the comments down below to let me know what you think of what this sounds like recorded. However, on to Eric Clapton's autobiography. And I'm going to break with tradition a little bit here in that I've done a little short review just for you of what's in the book without putting in too many spoilers. So I hope you really enjoy this. It's a different feature to anything I've ever done. Very, very different content. Let me know what you think, but here is what I thought of this. The back sleeve of the book's synopsis describes it as a pungent, witty and painfully honest autobiography. And I would have to agree entirely with the last of those adjectives, as I've never read such a warts and all honest book in my life. It must have taken a lot of guts to reveal so many dark secrets about himself so candidly. Setting aside the legendary eminence of the man and his utterly cult status as a guitar player, this book is a totally open-hearted telling of Eric's struggles, his personality flaws, frequent maniacally childish behaviour, betrayal of friends and family, his often criminal instincts and nature, the misogynistic treatment of many of the women in his life, and his continuing fight with addiction. Starting at the beginning, Eric had a very happy family life in his formative years living in Ripley in Surrey, but always felt like a bit of an outsider. At a young age, he was to discover why. His parents, Rose and Jack Clapp, were in fact his grandparents, and his much older sister Patricia was actually his mother. She, in turn, was a product of an earlier marriage Rose had with Oxford-educated Reginald Cecil Clapton, who died of consumption just 5 years after wedding her. And this is how Eric came to be a Clapton, taking his mother's surname rather than Clapp. His real father, Edward Fryer, was a pianist and Canadian airman in the Second World War, and Eric was the product of the briefest affairs between Edward and a 15-year-old Patricia. Clapton never got to meet his father despite trying to track him down, and barely had much to do with his mother Pat until her later life. This is something that affected him in a deep and profound way, and throughout the book we are asked to reflect on how the relative insecurities about himself shaped and influenced the guitar player in many positive but even more negative ways. Eric blames most of the darker sides of his personality on his lack of security in origin. However, I think at times this comes across as naive and churlish, given that Rose and Jack continued to support him completely as their son right up until their deaths. I was shocked at how candidly Clapton confesses to stories in which his childhood self steals from shops and completely vandalises a train carriage with a group of his Ripley friends simply for kicks. It also surprised me how quickly he cut the same childhood friends loose to follow his own path. One thing that this highlights, and a theme that reoccurs throughout his life, is that Eric is a bit of a loner. Sometimes through choice, but equally comfortably when it's not. And while he suggests that he craved a normal loving relationship, the younger Clapton in his 20s and 30s often comes across as immature and having consistently been incapable of forming any sort of healthy, respectable bond with the opposite sex. An art scholar with a keen interest in fashion, Eric was obsessed with clothes, and latterly with the stylised refurbishing of his family home, Hurtwood. However, he was kicked out of art college after just the first year for failing to meet the expected output, and this is what led to his decision to follow his other passion, the guitar. We all owe somewhat of a debt of gratitude to the tutor who flunked him as a draftsman. From the Yardbirds through John Mayall's Blues Breakers, Cream, Blind Faith and Derek and the Dominoes, Eric confesses to a trail of mistrust, betrayal and contempt for many of his musicians. On more than one occasion he turned away while his manager fired players who'd given years of loyal service to the man and his band. Through all of the early part of the book, Clapton blames the drink, the drugs, his lack of connection with his family, in fact anything and anyone but himself, for the way in which he treated the people around him. We get the occasional glimpses of affection for some, like John Mayall, who he looked up to as a kind of schoolmaster, but even then, when he was given a roof over his head by Mayall, Eric upped and left him high and dry to travel around Europe in a bus with a bunch of other musicians. There were some insights into certain people that set the record straight in contrast to Reputation. For example, Eric describes Ginger Baker, the Cream drummer, and a man with a reputation for a violent temper, as actually being a very kind man who desperately wanted people to like him. Eric got to play and work with some of the greats such as Dylan, Lennon, the Stones, Jimmy Page,
and he formed a particular lifelong friendship with Beatle George Harrison, and an utterly unhealthy obsession with Harrison's wife Patty, who he later married. If Clapton's relationship with his peers was fractious, then his love life was definitely worse, and his treatment of long-time partners like Alice Ormsby Gore led to their spiral into drugs and alcohol, and unfortunately, ultimately death. Even the Italian model Lori Del Santo, mother of his tragic son Connor, was cast aside so that he could try again with his relationship with Pattie Boyd. Eric and his bands always banned their partners from going on tour so that they could openly enjoy flings with a different girl in every city. All of this earlier life debauchery finally caught up with Clapton when he found himself a father and in desperate need to straighten out his drink and drugs habit. Habits by which his own confession rendered many of the memories he had of events like playing Madison Square Garden with John Lennon, his first session work with Bob Dylan, and many of his Cream gigs as blurry vagaries that he only knows through film records and of which he is somewhat embarrassed. Despite wanting to be a good father, Eric confesses in the book to finding it almost impossible, as he considered himself a child, still unable to look after himself domestically, let alone a son. For me, this was as big a turning point in the book as it must have been a life event for Clapton. And from this point onwards, we see a guy who grew from being spoilt, uncensored, uncontrolled, a man-child who achieved fame and fortune at an early age and never intended to take any responsibility for his actions, into a father. Clapton reflects on his life and how he viewed himself and how he treated those around him, and from that point onwards he seems to have changed utterly for the better. It was devastating to understand how profoundly Connor, his young son, had affected Eric and helped him to change, only to lose him in a freak fall from a New York skyscraper window at only 4.5 years of age, and just as the two were forming such a close fraternal bond. If I went through the first chapters of the book, having my illusions of the man completely shattered and growing a healthy contempt for the young Clapton, the later chapters slowly but surely rebuilt my respect and appreciation for him. He spent the later half of his life giving back and helping change the life of others for the positive. Through his investments in the Antietam Rehab Crossroads Clinic, which he founded and funded by auctioning off his prized guitar collection, to the charitable gigs and appearances he's done, Clapton has more than squared his pitch, in my opinion. I was delighted reading the closing chapters that in finding and falling properly in love with now-wife Melia, and having 2 more daughters, bringing his total to 3, Clapton finally feels contented and complete. He's been 30 years sober and continues to attend the 12-step program for alcoholics while enjoying family life, often aboard his own luxury yacht. I've purposely refrained from revealing the detail of the book, particularly from the music and guitar perspective, because I think it's a worthy read for anybody, not just guitarists or Clapton fans. And so I'll leave the many surprises this autobiography contains for you to discover for yourself. Suffice to say that the guitarist Eric Clapton, who I always love to hear play and has been a continual inspiration for me as a player, has now also become an inspiration for me in life. His life highlights that we must all come full circle, and the main thing is, it should be a ride we make the most of.
Yeah, very, very different content, as I say. I haven't done that before. It's my first ever book review ever, bar none. And it's just for you. I hope you did find it interesting, and I hope it maybe inspires you to pick up a copy of Eric's book and have a read, because he is an incredibly fascinating man and he's had an incredibly fascinating life. He's had trials and tribulations and he has been badly behaved like most of us have, but the guy has also done an awful lot of good in his life despite facing quite a bit of turmoil. Anyway, again, let me know what you think of that in the comments down below, folks, and whether you've enjoyed me doing a little book review. I don't have to do them again, but if you've enjoyed it, maybe I'll do it again. Who knows? But one thing I do know for sure is that I will be back with more demos. We've got the Marshall out here now. Well, we've got both Marshalls, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in future videos. So we will be doing some very, very interesting stuff. I've also got some really interesting news. I've been contacted by another Chinese manufacturer asking me if I'd be willing to review one of their products. And I think it's something that you'll find really exciting. So I'll tell you more about that in the next video as well. If you've enjoyed this, please subscribe, give me a like, and if you do subscribe, be sure to hit that bell icon so that you get notified of my uploads as and when I put content up. Thanks so much for watching as always, and you take good care.